That way I know where it is, I think, or not. But anyway, so there, it says we're recording. That's a good sign. And we do have Morris Arts. And for our next adventure in this, we're going to have to find out what it costs to upgrade to webinar version, which is... Well, hello everybody. This is this is known as the Brady Bunch view.
Oh, there we go.
Are we recording now?
It says we are.
Okay, well, I think we should kick this off.
Let's do it. And we got some people coming in. I'll keep adding them while you do that.
Okay. Thank you, Joe. And welcome, everyone, to A Life in the Arts, a Zoom series offered by the Masterwork Foundation, the Masterwork Music and Art Foundation. I'm Todd Whitley, the Foundation's Executive Director. The Masterwork Music and Art Foundation is a nonprofit arts organization founded in Morristown, New Jersey, over 50 years ago. Dedicated to excellence in the arts, today the organization offers 3 levels of grant opportunities for artists and arts organizations. Community grants designed to encourage community engagement with the arts. Competitive grants offered to inspire excellence in artistry, and a Premier Award, a $10,000 grant to help an emerging artist reach the next level of their career. With A Life in the Arts, Masterwork Arts is building a library of interviews with people who have dedicated their lives to the arts or supporting the arts as a resource to help guide young artists with their career aspirations. Tonight, I'm very happy. We are launching A Life in the Arts with Dr. Mitchell Saskin, a clinical psychologist with a private practice in New York City and an adjunct professor at the Teachers College of Columbia University. Dr. Saskin has helped a number of artists and creatives in his practice. And let's see, and Todd just got lost. And he's going to share some coping tips for the pandemic, like what to do when you lose your line, with us tonight. So interviewing Dr. Saskin is Joseph White, a longtime board member of Masterwork Arts and someone who's dedicated his life to the arts himself. Joe's history with Masterwork goes back to 1962 when he auditioned for the chorus. Later, he went on to run the theater program and produce a number of shows in the process. So some quick housekeeping tips. The interview will last roughly a half hour. And if everyone would mute their audio during this time, that would be great. Then there will be a 10-minute Q&A following the interview, where you'll be free to ask questions by unmuting your audio or by typing in your question into the chat function. And with that, Joe, if you would please take it away.
Hi, good evening. And greetings, Dr. Saskin. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Oh, my pleasure.
Before we go into some questions about people specifically in the arts in the current situation, I wanted to ask you to describe your own approach to these matters. You were a classically trained clinical psychologist, but you've also added alternative, holistic, and mindfulness disciplines into your practice. This is a really good combination, I think. Can you explain how you arrived at this and why you think it's effective?
Sure, my pleasure. So initially I went to school in the strictly kind of psychodynamic model of psychotherapy or understanding behavior. But then as I started working with clients over the years, I realized it put too much focus on kind of a deficit model of what people couldn't do or what blocks there were to what people couldn't accomplish or how they felt about themselves. And so the great focus of that kind of analytic way of working was to look at those blocks and to clear out those blocks. And then, that person could function more freely. But as I'm working with people, I realized there was something was missing in terms of knowing that each person also had within them a certain purpose and goal that was leading them towards a satisfying life. And that traditional psychotherapy really didn't kind of pay attention to that. What was it within them that they really wanted to do, or helping them uncover that? And that's really what's helped my perspective with artists as well, being able to kind of look at that purpose or why they want to express themselves in that way. Many psychological difficulties came from not being able to express their purpose. And so I found that there were many methods other than just speaking to get to that, where the sense of mindfulness, kind of visualizations, being aware of our feelings through our body, were all things I integrated into my practice. So that's really kind of where I came from, how I came to this way of working with clients, which I felt is much more integrative and holistic, and really captures the desires of people more than just their deficits.
Thank you. You've worked with a number of people in the creative fields over the years, and you have artists as clients. Is there anything you can share about the difference about how they process challenges or see the world as opposed to your clients from other disciplines?
Yeah, I mean, I think artists have each artist or person who sees themselves as an artist sees a kind of purpose in expressing themselves in the world that is different than other people who may not have that desire to express themselves in the world. They are they are expressing their personhood, who they are through the arts, whether it's writing, singing, performing, dancing. So there's a part of them that needs to be expressed through the arts, while another person may not have that kind of desire. And with that, there's a great difficulty because in wanting to express themselves in the arts, many artists really have a perfectionistic quality because they want to really be the best they can because they want to express themselves and they don't want to fall short. So many artists I have found are very hard on themselves and they want to put on the most perfect performance because anything less they feel is not up to what they really want to express to the world. So I have found many artists really want to express themselves, but are very hard on themselves as well.
With the current pandemic and all of the things that it's brought us, social distancing and running around in masks and my son, who's a cinematographer, he lives in California, and a few months ago, he got a gig in New York to shoot a commercial, and he had to fly into New York and spend 14 days in a hotel room in Soho in order to just get to work. So I don't think that's a unique situation. I think many people in our society are actually experiencing some real challenges to our collective mental health. And well, at Masterwork Music and Arts Foundation, we're very aware of the impact that the pandemic's had on, well, particularly performing artists who are basically almost out of business for this. But we're wondering what you've seen And if you've got some recommendations you can make about how to balance those stresses, but without the cushions of socialization that we normally have to help with them.
Yeah. No, I mean, this is probably the most difficult time for our society in my lifetime. The idea of all of the social kind of supports not being there in person. And for many of us, our purpose or our work is not being able to be performed or followed through. And so what I kind of, on a general sense, I recommend people kind of really bolstering their resources. It's really important to stay healthy, to take care of themselves in a physical way. It's also important to stay connected in ways that you can, through Zoom or through other ways that you can connect to people, loved ones, or if you can see them in person, to stay connected in that way. It's also important to fuel your passions. And this really applies to artists, where you may not be able to express your art in the world, but how to maintain the identity of an artist. So I know many artists now have to do things that you...
Hold on, I'm going to mute her. Yeah, okay, hopefully that...
Okay.
Yeah, no, this is a Zoom thing.
Gotcha. So many artists have to now, work in positions to make money that isn't their chosen profession. And the idea of how to maintain your self-esteem and identity, even though you may not be doing what you want. And it's really important to kind of build in that structure for yourself as an artist or anyone else, to maintain that structure for practice, maintaining that structure for, improving. And also looking at this from a different point of view, that sometimes with this stopping based on the pandemic, it gives us a moment to be introspective. It gives us, am I doing what I want to do? Is with this space, can I now decide on doing something differently? Or is this what I want? I have many clients who, because of the pandemic, have been laid off, and I'm helping them use that opportunity to kind of follow what they're wanting. Sometimes people get caught up in ways of kind of making money or compromising, but in a way of stopping and seeing, what is it their soul really wants to do? What is that desire that they really want to do? And using this opportunity to explore it. So there's many losses with the pandemic, but there's also opportunity to see our lives from a different perspective. And, to step back and say, I'm getting off the track here. And can I see if I want to maintain on that track, or do I want to change a track of the way I'm going, or do things in a slightly different way? So I see it both as a loss and a need to kind of work on maintaining our resources, cognitive, physical, and emotional, but also the idea of looking at what has this given us in perspective, and can we take that perspective to make possibly different choices in our lives?
Well, I was going to say that that artists having to have day jobs is not a new thing, particularly. It's kind of always been with us. It occurred to me that the sort of the standard one, which is waiting on tables, well, that's become a challenge. And in addition, it isn't so easy. We have a lot of restaurants in my local area that are at like 2/3 capacity. and have had to move everything outdoors, which is going to get difficult as it gets cold. But at any rate, we're now we're looking at people who are trying to adapt to all of this, and I'm going to move on to another question, because you really answered the next question.
Okay.
Wonderful. But self-care has been a subject that many of us don't consider in our daily lives as thoughtfully as we probably should. And it's become a lot more, paramount. It's not just getting through the days, it's also in what shape are you getting through the days. I know you're not a self-help author, however, but do you have any tips on how to approach self-care in a practical way for artists and all of us?
Yeah, no, I think for all of us, the idea of stepping back and structure is very important. That the pandemic has really thrown up all our kind of routines and ways of doing it. And for many of us, you have to kind of rebuild it. And without structure, we kind of flail. We don't feel like we know what we're going to do day to day. And because we're used to having external structure put on us. So self-care is to say, well, what do I need to give myself? It's kind of looking inward and saying, well, how do I want to have my day to feed my being? How do I want to, physically, emotionally, being able to deal with these situations? So with that, again, being able to exercise is really important. I think it's really important to stay physically fit in these times, to be able to move, because we're spending a lot of time in front of screens and not being with people. Getting out in nature is really helpful. Being able to with the pandemic, everything has changed in a human way, but it's interesting to get out into nature and see that it's the same. And that kind of gives you a sense of security. It's like, wow, all these relationships are changing, but then you could go out into nature and you could hear the birds and see the sky. And you could say, wait, there is stability here. There's something, not everything is up in the air, and being able to do that. And then kind of connecting with people that you love. If you can't do it in person, virtually, creating new habits or new hobbies that feed you. Now you may have some time to do that. Being able to, read that book that you never read, or watch that movie, or even practice, something that you want a new skill, or hone a skill that you've been working on. So looking at it as an opportunity, but not just, you have to be active in being able to do this. You can't take this passively. You have to be active in creating a structure so that you can feel in charge. It's the passivity that makes us feel bad about ourselves. If we take an active role in our self-care, then generally we feel better about ourselves.
And then the next question I have is that it's going from the personal to ourselves, to all of us together, to our collective community care, if you will. And well, first of all, I'll say that I'm just amazed at the arguments that I have seen about something as simple as wearing a mask, which, notice this wasn't a problem for the Japanese. They had, they're used to doing this. It's no biggie for them. And then they've done much better in terms of caseloads and stuff. But I'm, the problem that I see is that we've gotten to the point where some of us are some of us angry because their routine and their life has been so upended, and so therefore something like, well, gee, it would be really good if you wore a mask. That seems to take on, that's like some kind of horrendous affront.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think this pandemic has really shown visually, right? People who can have a higher level of moral reasoning, where one can think of others as opposed to just thinking of themselves. And usually we don't know this about people, but yet now with masks, it kind of becomes more self-evident that there are certain people, and this is the way from a psychological perspective you would see it, that they feel hurt, and maybe they felt that way in their life, out of control. They feel that the only way they can maintain that control is kind of by asserting their ability not to do something, kind of like a adolescent. That the idea, well, I'll choose not to do this because you can't tell me what to do. And it really is a kind of immature kind of psychological state that comes from a sense of hurt and never being heard and not feeling worthy within themselves. So that's one way of one can even deal with people who don't wear masks in terms of compassion, because it really is coming from a sense of not respecting themselves, so they can't respect others. And, on a psychological level, they really, because of their self-hurt, don't have the capacity for empathy. And that's what you're talking about in a community, that they really can't put themselves in the place of another that is different from them. That they can't say, well, if I'm doing this because of another person. They are just so hurt that they need to just preserve their own independence. But and in America, unfortunately, the idea of freedom is sometimes taught without responsibility. That I have the freedom to do things, but they don't say, well, your freedom to do things ends when it can bring harm to someone else. And that part is generally not seen. So it's a very complex psychological kind of syndrome, but also represents many of the things that we're seeing in the country as a whole.
Well, thank you very much. Well, shall we, Todd, is it time to open the floor for questions?
Sure, that sounds like a good idea.
Okay. And if so, anyone who wants to ask a question of Dr. Saskin, if you will unmute yourself so we can hear you. And ask your question. I can hear you. Hi, Wayne.
Hello.
Oh, okay. Hi.
Now, I was just wondering to the good doctor whether perhaps to a certain degree we've become too overly concerned about this pandemic. Mm-hmm. I have two very good friends of ours that are down at the shore, mm-hmm. and they are absolutely frightened to the point of not going out, of being sure that all of their groceries are delivered to the house, and that they're afraid of it. Mm-hmm. And one of the reasons we really haven't been in touch with them as far as going down and visiting them is that my wife and I realized that from our standpoint, we're not overly concerned, because if we're doing what we're supposed to do, and and keeping our distance and wearing our masks and washing our hands. And so, you know, we've been told that this is the way to go about it. And if you do that, you should feel perfectly free to go out and have dinner, go out and circulate to a certain degree, keeping distance. And I'm wondering if like our friends, there might be this over concern with the pandemic. No matter how you cut the cookie, it's terrible when someone dies of this. But when you look at the fact that we're talking about 360 million people in this country, and you look at the number of deaths and things, it's still they're still small in number compared to the number of people here. And I think we have to maybe have a slightly different perspective on this. What do you think?
Well, I think what you're speaking about is, actually it's two things. I think one is how we accept risk for ourselves. And different people have a different kind of threshold for accepting risk, and control or lack of control. So when people don't feel safe, that they want to have more control over things, and that allows them to feel safer.
Safer, yeah.
Right, and that's, you know, as long, you know, and that may limit their interaction with others. And scientifically, it may not be warranted, but yet for them, it's a point of safety. And I think everyone has that different point. And as we know, even before the pandemic, people had a different sensitivity to germs and cleanliness and things like that. So I think that is just being amplified by the pandemic, where certain people, you know, go to security and control more than others. Others feel more comfortable in terms of having the facts and accepting some risk, while others don't want to accept any risk at all. And I think that's, again, one's personality and where you're coming from. The other aspect, I think, is how to understand our effect on the overall experience. While truthfully, right, we could look at numbers of people who have, you know, passed away from this or have gotten sick from this, and the overall number of people in the United States or in the world, but I don't think that really captures the suffering and captures how much this has affected people's kind of feeling of security and feeling safe in the world. So I think we have to kind of look towards, away from our personal kind of, well, we feel secure or don't feel secure, but understand how our actions affect the greater numbers. And sometimes, you know, we could look at, you know, the total amount of people and say, oh, well, it's a lot, but it's not that much. But yet, I think we have to understand how, as a community or as a country or as a world, the pandemic has really shown us each of our actions, every one of our actions affects everyone else. So I think we can't really say, well, it's not so bad because I could protect myself or do this. Because when you're doing it, you're not just doing it for your own safety. And this is the kind of the community aspect. You're doing it for the safety of everyone that you could possibly come in contact with. And as that kind of multiplies out. So I think we can't just look at the numbers and say, well, it's not that much. I think we have a responsibility as people and as a community of whatever we are in to realize our actions affect others. And we have to, when we take a risk, we're not just taking a risk for ourselves, we're taking a risk for other people we may not even know. So I think extending the concept of community beyond just, you know, people we know or numbers is something I think we could learn in this pandemic as well.
Any other questions?
Yeah, there's...
Tom here, Tom
Yeah,
Werder. Hi, Dr. Saskin. Thanks so much. This discussion is fascinating to me. Do you think that artists are particularly well suited for weathering this pandemic? In my opinion, I think they're particularly innovative. They know how to collaborate. They improvise well. They can work in isolation and in groups. So it feels to me like psychologically, artists may have a leg up in how to get through this. And I'm also fascinated by the fact that people who aren't artists are turning to art so much during this time to find their comfort and to feed their soul and to cope with what's going on. And they're looking to the artists to help guide their way through this. So I think there's some responsibility there as well for artists. So I just curious about your thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, and I think artists, by their nature and by the way they see their world and the way they collaborate as a natural part, are more flexible in that way, that they see, and and even they're looking always for a different way, a creative way, right? And I think that's the beauty, the way out of this, and that's what I was talking about in terms of the pandemic, that it's kind of shaken people up from their routines and has led them to having to foster creativity for themselves. And certain people aren't used to that, but artists are. And so the idea of being able to use that, and how artists have continued to kind of practice and show and, create a way of still performing that isn't, in these other media is amazing, because the desire to express themselves for anyone can't be extinguished. And I think and I think this is hopefully for other people who are kind of not used to expressing themselves in that way, by kind of saying, well, your structure's all kind of not there anymore. You have to be creative. You have to, and when I say creative, you have to go to your internal resources, right? Ways of dealing with things out of the ordinary. And I think you're right. Artists, by their nature, can be leaders in that way, and showing people, it's like, oh, I can't do this. No, there's always a solution. There's always a way of doing that. And there's some way that you can creatively come up with it through yourself and through collaboration. So I totally agree with what you're saying, and see artists having a great role in this, and coming out of the pandemic and being able to take that and rebuild our society in terms of art and the importance of art. Because I think it's really important now, right? Because everybody's saying, come back here, but artists are the last.
Right.
And right, and how to say, well, this is very important. And from a psychological perspective, I completely support that and validate that.
Great, thanks.
Anyone else?
Yes, hi. You could speak ahead.
Laura Ammerman, I'm Todd's cousin. So, I think, the public, as we already have mentioned, is hungry for the arts right now. I think a lot of us that were used to having access to it readily miss it terribly. But even people who weren't normal, consumers of artistic, experiences now are realizing how much they miss even the opportunity to consider it, right? And I'm worried a little bit about artists who may be putting themselves at risk to sort of feed that hunger, right? We've heard some things about I think it was Washington National Ballet's gala. They've had a huge outbreak as a result of some of the performances that they staged. And I'm just wondering how as a community we can maybe support that or be there for, like, I think just the natural anxiety that comes with that. And also just a lot of these folks are seriously worried about their livelihoods. You know, we're talking about Broadway not opening for a very, very long time, and, you know, other in-person performing arts not being in person. In our church, we have one singer. She wears a mask, stands all the way in the back, and belts it out through that mask, which is phenomenal. But, you know, how are we sort of dealing with all of that?
Well, I mean, I think we have to kind of understand two things: the impulse and the desire, and almost the need to express ourselves, and that it's so intrinsic to us as human beings, and especially to artists. And so that in a way we have to kind of be compassionate towards that desire, but also kind of being able to contain that desire in a safe way. And I think that, you know, for a short term, it's kind of like, you know, saying you have to put off this for a little bit, that we understand that you want to, and how different ways of funneling that creativity in different ways, as opposed to putting yourself and others at risk. And, you know, for me, you know, as, you know, a patron of the arts, you know, like, you know, I do the best I can in terms of, you know, Zoom and, you know, watching things. I know the Whitney has had this art series that I've been watching online that's been really dance and all kinds of different things. So there's ways of expressing yourself in a safer way. So I think that's the kind of thing, even though that it will come back, and being patient and knowing that your wish to make it change won't necessarily do it, and that to have that patience and hopefully building for the future, so that when it comes back, and hopefully when maybe economic situations or administration situations come out, maybe there will be, you know, looking for lobbying for funding for artists, so to have sustain them through this period, so that they could come back and, you know, give to the society what, you know, what we deserve and what they love giving. So yeah, it's a very hard thing, and I think we have to hold both. We have to acknowledge the desire, but also say we have to be safe. Hold back, even though I know you want to, we have to be safe as well. And, you know, for people who are out of work because of it, you know, again, compassion, help, you know, creativity, all the things that we've been talking about. And hoping for people who have been artists and can't work as artists now, realizing that they're still artists and being able to feed that, and that there will be a time where they'll come back and in many ways help society heal what's happened during the pandemic as well.
Thank you. And I guess I always have, my concern is, are the buildings for them to perform in going to still be able to be there, which is another challenge. Mm-hmm. But
well, you could be creative. There's going to be a lot of storefronts that are open.
That's true. Yep.
I mean, in New York and, you know, the Upper West Side, I think of each of these open places of possible performing spaces, and there are quite a lot of them.
Yeah.
So, you know, again, using that creativity, you know, being an artist is not just performing, as it was said, it's being creative, finding creative solutions.
Yeah.
And I think we need that more than ever.
Anyone else have a question for Dr. Saskin? Well,
I do.
Oh,
it's Tim.
Hi, Tim.
It's actually sort of continuing on that. As artists, how do we help people move forward and retain some of the information that's been presented to them over this pandemic in terms of, I don't like to use this word lightly, enlightening their reality and looking at, you know, what things are really important and what things are just fluff on the cake. Mm-hmm. So, you know, I'm just curious, you know, if you have a step-by-step or a handy manual to help that.
I mean, I think each of us have our own gifts and our own way of sharing our message with others, that I think using your sense, your creativity, and finding ways of the things that, you know, resonate with most people on a psychological basis are things that are entertaining and are things that make you think or that are different, as opposed to just, and that's what artists can do. They can bring a message in a way where someone can see it from a different perspective. And I think that's what I would say, you know, thinking about, you know, what people need to do are the idea of community, the idea of wearing masks, the idea of helping others, being able to even, as risks may be, seem low, knowing that it's still there, you know, finding creative ways of expressing these things. And I think that's up to each individual. But I would say as an artist to, you know, finding an avenue to share that, finding a collaboration to do that would be wonderful.
All right, anyone else? Well, hearing none, thank you very, very much, Dr. Saskin. This has been a really useful and really, informative isn't the right word, but I think helpful is the right word, evening. And thank you so much for being with us. And thank all of you folks who participated for this inaugural Life in the Arts event. And we'll be doing these. We're hoping to actually keep to a regular schedule, but we're working on that. And we'll see you at the next one.
Thank you, Joe.
Thanks,
Thank
Todd.
you, Mitchell.
Thank
everyone
you.
for attending.
Okay.
Thanks for the invite, Todd.
Thanks.
Thanks, Joe.
Okay, right. So good night, all.
Good night, all.
Good
Good night.
Good night.
Bye.
Okay.
Good night. Be safe.